thank you to the Pennsylvania Soybean Board for sponsoring our 2025 Crops Conference and Crops Days events. The Pennsylvania Soybean Board is responsible for the proper allocation of soybean checkoff dollars. This farmer-led board preserves and advances animal agriculture, identifies and promotes sustainable practices that provide ROI to farmers, promote biofuels through partnering opportunities, and drive new initiatives to increase the value and understanding of soy. Check them out online at pasoybean.org. Sponsors like the Pennsylvania Soybean Board allow us to host the annual Crops Conference and Crops Days events across the state. These events recap the 2024 PA crop production season, give insight to the latest agronomic research, products, and technology, and offer attendees pesticide recertification credits. If you would like to learn more about these events or to register, visit extension.psu.edu/crops-2025.
Welcome to another episode of the Agronomy Highlights podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Spellman, and I'm joined here today with my co-host and colleague, Justin Brackenridge. Justin, how are you doing today?
Good, Ryan. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm living the dream. I think we're right at the cusp of thinking about next season. I guess we've been thinking about next season ever since
We're
last
always
season.
thinking about next season.
That's right, but it feels like, after coming back through January, we're midway now through our winter meeting season, starting to have a lot of conversations about what's going to happen in the 2025 field season and what to expect.
Yeah, I think that optimistically, right? I don't want to jinx it, so I don't want to say too much about it. But I think a lot of the people that I interact with were thinking about next season by maybe 2/3 or a third of the way through last season, and we're really looking forward to a better year. And I think this is kind of an interesting way to maybe transition our brains from last year to next year and thinking about some new technologies and some new options and what we've got out there to maybe make it a little better for us.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess we can kind of get right into the meat and potatoes of this episode. And I say this episode, but this will be a little bit of a two-parter. So we'll have two episodes coming out today. So in this first one, we're going to do a 2025 weed management update.
So what we're going to work on today is kind of a combination where I mentioned this was a two-parter, and we've got the 2025 weed management update, and we're also going to do a 2025 disease and insect update. And if you've ever been to our agronomic pesticide updates, you would be familiar with the what's new in weeds or what's new for 2025 or 2024, right? We all know it's a perennial thing that we update every year. Basically, what we're doing is we're kind of getting that spread out a little bit. We're taking a little bit of a higher view on it, and we're putting it in podcast form. So it'll be something new for us, Ryan. What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's great when we can kind of repackage some of the content that our team offers this time of year. All of us are going around to our counties a lot of times, multiple times to do different pesticide programming for folks to get their license. So a lot of this what's new kind of content is surrounding pest management and the usage of chemicals often. So yeah, I'd say we can jump right into weed management first with Dwight Lingenfelter. So Dwight is one of the specialists on our team, and he is a weed specialist. So he's going to talk a little bit about what's new in the herbicide world, chemistries possibly, mixtures, and then he's also going to talk a little bit about some of the legislation or some of the newer Endangered Species Act things to be aware of. So yeah, Justin, anything else to say before we let Dwight on?
I'm looking forward to it. This is one of these things, maybe one of the most practical podcasts you might hear from us for the year. So settle in and listen, and Dwight, whenever you're ready.
Hi there. Yeah, so good to be here again. So yeah, as Ryan mentioned, that I'll provide a little bit of an overview here of some of the newer herbicide products and some other aspects of weed management that we need to be thinking about here coming into the new season.
So this is, and Dwight, before you get kicked off, right? Like, if you've ever gone to one of our pesticide meetings in Pennsylvania, I always ask people, like, do you remember what's the earliest version of what's new of agronomic weed control? And I can never get a great answer. But this is basically what we're looking at is the what's new with agronomic weed control for 2025, right? And so if you hear something here that you really like or you really think you want to know some more about, contact one of us, contact Dwight, come to one of our pesticide update meetings where we're going to be digging into this a little more. Dwight always puts a really great sheet together. So that he really, at that point, he's going to talk about the rates and the restrictions and all of that. But today, what he's looking to do is we're going to take this in section of commodity, something like corn, beans, forages, and just kind of go over what's changed from last year, what the new products are, and how we can use them to fit to our system. So, Dwight, how does starting with corn sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. So as far as some of the corn products, and again, these aren't necessarily brand new. I mean, you may have seen some of or heard some of these trade names in different publications or commercial press or so forth or different field days. So what I plan to do is this is by no means going to be exhaustive. I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights of some of the products I think that you'll see the most information about, or you'll maybe see on the you go to your dealer and you'll find some of these. So some of the ones that you'll hear about, Syngenta has their new product called Storin, which is basically a three-way or a four-way mixture. It contains, the active ingredient in dual, the active ingredient in Zidjo, which is pyroxasulfone, and then Callisto, the mesotrione, and then the bicyclopyrone. So basically, four active ingredients, but really only two unique modes of action. So we have two group 15s and two group 27s. And really this is a herbicide that is going to have activity on a lot of broadleaf broadleaves and grasses. And it's primarily going to be used pre. However, it can be used post-emergence as well, up to V8 stage of corn. So again, it's just another herbicide that in their arsenal, if you will, of different corn products. They have things like Lexar and Lumax and Acuron GT and Halix. So those are all available as well, and this is just another addition. Now, one thing that's unique about Storin is the fact that it does not contain atrazine. So you can include atrazine or tank mix with atrazine, but it's just one of those that does not include atrazine in the premix. And then moving on from there, we have a couple from Corteva that are going to be used in corn. One called Cairo, which contains acetochlor, and also tropramazone, which is sometimes known as Impact or Armazon, and then clopyralid or Stinger. So again, that's primarily a broadleaf herbicide. Can be used pre-emergence, but it's going to be primarily used post-emergence, up to corn that's about 24 inches tall. And again, that's one that can be tank mixed as well, to enhance the spectrum of activity. And then another one that they have on in their listing is one called Resicor Rev, REV, and they've had Resicor now for a number of years, but basically they kind of tweaked the formulation, which now allows it to be applied up to corn, which is 24 inches tall. And it's a combination of acetochlor, which is encapsulated, and then the mesotrione, and then clopyralid. So again, that's going to be primarily used as pre, but again, it can be used post emergence as well, in that regard.
So Dwight, I have maybe two kind of questions here. So as you're going through these, I'm recognizing that a lot of these seem like different mixtures. Is this another one of those years where we don't really have any new chemistries coming out? It's really just new mixtures of the same chemistries. And then I guess yeah, I'll ask you that one first.
Yeah, that's a good point there, Ryan. So, um, yeah, I mean, we're quite honestly, we're going over 30 years now without a true and unique mode of action. We're still in the hunt for new unique modes of action. Now, FMC has a new mode of action that's coming down the line that's going to be used in certain rice herbicides. They're looking at it to see whether it may be used in corn and soybeans, but we'll see. but at least in our area, for typical corn, soybean, forage type programs, nothing that we have is brand new. Now there are new active ingredients that can be found within certain modes of action, but not a truly unique mode of action. So really, what I'm talking about now are just a lot of new premixtures or new reformulations or just different combinations like that allow have new different products and product names. So I think that's where the confusion comes from sometimes, because people see a new trade name and think it's something new and exciting, and really in most cases all it is just a new kind of a repackaging or different formulation of product that's already been in existence.
Sure, I guess, and that's actually kind of a good segue into my other question here. Given that a lot of these are tweaked mixtures, right? They're just kind of coming out with a new trade name that's just a repackaging or a new mixture. We have, you mentioned earlier, Storin, which lacks atrazine, and I'm curious, is this just due to the building of atrazine resistance, or is this like in in uh, in response to a predicted like restrictions on atrazine?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of all of the above. I mean, obviously there's certain utility of atrazine. Atrazine still is a very good product and a good fit. In our region especially, has a number of weeds that it's still very effective on. But you're right. I mean, there are some species that have become resistant. Also, we are finding this phenomenon called enhanced degradation of atrazine, which actually there's a lot of different microbes in the soil that really degraded it a lot quicker than it was in the past, and so that we don't get the longevity of it as we did say 25, 30 years ago. So that's happening, and then then the other factor is this aspect of just regulatory issues, the potential of getting the rates potentially cut by the EPA, or just the utilities being cut in certain areas that may be prone to getting into the groundwater more readily and so forth. So yes, I think it's various aspects of why atrazine isn't being included in some of these newer mixtures. And plus, quite honestly, they're the dealers and so forth, they get by adding atrazine to the mix, to the pre-mix, or excuse me, the tank mix. They can help sell some of their product to atrazine products. So there's various reasons why atrazine is not in a product like Storin, for example. So then, just to kind of continue on, another product or two here related to corn. There's one that BASF has now called Certain, which actually contains two active ingredients, and it's a premixture of saflufenicil, which is the same active ingredient that is found in Sharpen, and then also pyroxyl sulfone, which is found in Zidua. And this combination is really meant for the utility of being applied pre or even actually into early post up to about the V3 stage in corn. Now, one thing to consider about this product is the formulation of it is a special, what's called a solid encapsulation formulation. And even though it has the active ingredient of sharpen in it, you cannot get burn down activity of this because the encapsulated form of this, the saflufenicil, doesn't have enough foliar burn down activity. So this is one of these where the idea behind this is to get, because the rate is high enough, that we're technically getting would be equivalent of about 3 fluid ounces of sharpen, and that provides itself some residual activity. So this is a herbicide that's really more of a residual herbicide and not necessarily a foliar herbicide. So I think some people, when I talk about this product, they get excited thinking they can just, spray Certain and they're going to get burned down of things like mare's tail and other broadleaf weeds, and then also get residual, and that's not the case. You're still going to need to add, some additional burn down products in it to get to control of things like mare's tail. So again, that's one that to understand the product it's designed specifically to go over corn post-emergence, um, and then have the residual activity from there. So that is one that you will see on the market, and it does have activity on annual grasses and broadleaves as well. So those are the main ones I think for the corn you'll see this season. So if you want to, I can continue to move on to soybeans and provide an
Yeah, so
overview of.
I do have one quick question about Certain here. Does this newer encapsulation technology, is there anything for folks to be aware of like the amount of rain that it needs to break down, or is there something, is it that 1 inch of rain that we usually hear for post or pre that you need to really activate this?
Yeah, so this is kind of a unique formulation. The fact that they call it a ZC formulation, and really it's the encapsulation is on the saflufenicil. So that's the one where if you're going to get any injury onto corn, for example, that would come from saflufenicil plate sprayed post-emergence. So this is a formulation that once it's sprayed onto the soil. Then after a few hours of drying, it actually diffuses out of this encapsulated formulation, and actually the saflufenicil gets into the soil moisture, or the water that's in the soil from that point. And then the pyroxasulfone is available immediately. So having said that, what that means is you still need to have rainfall to activate it. So we typically say you need to have at least a half inch to an inch of rainfall within a week of application to really get any of these products activated. So really the design behind this formulation is to be able to allow the saflufenicil post-emergence, so it doesn't injure the corn. So, but then once that's the case, then all the other principles come into play, where a half inch to an inch of rainfall need to be there to activate it and get it into the zone of where the weeds are emerging.
So I have a follow-up on that. I think that's a really interesting concept, right? So when I started in 17, we were still fighting the fight on Mare's Tail and what we were going to do. And Sharpen kind of came in as like this kind of interesting burn down alternative to Sharpen. And now we've taken Sharpen to the next step, right? Of going away from this really neat burn down product that we have. And now we're saying, let's look at the residual side of that rather than just this burn down component. Is there a limit to the amount of this product? Like, and I guess I'm saying this product being like the Sharpen, the soflufenicil, that can be sprayed, or what would you pair this with for a good burn down?
Yeah, I mean that's one of those questions that you need to be careful of the rate, because it can have issues from a rotational standpoint. So, at the typical use rate of Certain is going to be about 14 fluid ounces on most of our medium soils. It can go up to, I think 17 fluid ounces if I recall in certain soils. So yeah, so if you start adding things like Sharpen into the mix as well, you have to really be careful of how much additional saflufenicil you're going to have in the mix. So yeah, that's where the addition of something like that plus like a 2,4-D, and of course glyphosate can be used as well. But then again, as soon as you start adding 2,4-D in the mix, you need to be careful about how soon corn can be planted with that, because then you have issues with potential corn germination, especially if the seed slits are open. So you're right. I mean, just because we have the technology, and it looks good, it's just trying to figure out how to put these in a practical standpoint, because all of a sudden you start spraying these things too early, and then we start to run out of the residuals into the crop. So so yes, this is one of these where putting programs together is going to be kind of an interesting puzzle to figure out, getting good burn down, but then also getting residual activity out of the product once it's in the crop, to control some of those weeds like Palmer amaranth and water hemp and ones like that.
I promised a 15, 20,000 foot view, but I just can't help myself. It's just anyway, yeah, so that's been a great overview of corn. Soybeans. Let's jump into beans.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of them you're going to hear about. One this one product actually in Versa, comes from Corteva. Really, again, this is one of these where it's really nothing new as far as an active ingredient because it's acetochlor. We've had acetochlor now for 40 some years, but again, they just have a new formulation. It's an encapsulated formulation of acetochlor. It's going to be very similar to Warrant from Bayer. So again, and now this is one that can also be sprayed in corn and in sorghum as well. But again, I think the primary push was in soybeans to mainly be able to use it, over the top, to get residual activity, mid-season, about V4, V5 stage of soybean. Then you have the residual there to help control things like palmer and water hemp. So again, that's one that it's going to be primarily used in soybeans, but it does have some other crops as well. And then another one you're going to see that BASF has this year is this Liberty Ultra, which is really just kind of what's considered the next generation of Liberty, so glufosinate. So what they've done is they we're able to allow it for be like a higher load of glufosinate, so you can use less. So basically, more of the active isomer is in the jug now. So instead of using the standard 32 ounces of Liberty, now you're down to about 24 fluid ounces would be equivalent rate. So again, it's just one of those things where it's a very similar utility product. But again, they're just kind of reformulating it to get some additional use out of some of these new isomers they're able to sequester and use. And this is going to be on the market, but there's still a lot of the old Liberty 280 out there as well that you'll probably see this year. And then there's numerous other generic glufosinates as well. Things like Interline from UPL and Cheetah and a few, several other ones that can be purchased, as well. So that's one that you need to be aware of. And one thing that's kind of different about this Liberty Ultra, since it was registered, they put all these ESA and the Endangered Species Act guidelines to mitigate its drift and runoff, to adjacent fields and so forth to protect endangered species. So this is one of these herbicides that you're going to see a lot of that language on the label that needs to be followed in order to mitigate it to reduce drift. So that's one that you'll see. And then Enlist one has already been out there, is another one that you're going to see the language on. But again, that's one that is in time we're going to see more and more labels that have language related to the Endangered Species Act.
So, Dwight, I have a quick question of this glufosinate, the newer isomer of glufosinate. Does this in any way, because you're reducing the concentration, right, and maybe it means what's there is more effective, does that in any way like preserve its utility, or make it safer?
Not necessarily, because what's considered this L-glufosinate. If those of you are interested in organic chemistry, there's different isomers. So this L isomer is the active glufosinate isomer, and then there's another active or inactive isomer of glufosinate that is currently found in things like Liberty and other generic forms of glufosinate. So all they did is they were able to sequester the non-active glufosinate molecules out of it, and then just leave the active form. So it really is just a higher concentration, if you will, of the active form. So you're going to see both forms in the jug, of the existing jugs right now. Whereas with these newer glufosinates, it's mainly going to be this L-glufosinate.
So, Dwight, what about forages? Is there anything new happening in the world of forages this year?
Yeah, so one herbicide that we've actually been talking about now for, maybe not 10 years, but close to 10 years. There's a herbicide, way back then called Proclova that was coming onto the market. Well, since then they've actually changed the name of that Proclova to Nova Graze. So we actually have a new herbicide called Nova Graze, And really it's just a combination of a couple active ingredients. This one product active they call Rinskor active, and then they pair that up with 2,4-D. And so again, this is going to be able to be used in any type of cool or warm season forage grasses. And then also one of the uniqueness of this one is it preserves or it doesn't kill white clover. So that's the only legume that it doesn't kill, or doesn't injure significantly. So whereas if you have red or crimson or alfalfa or lespedezas or something like that, you can have some issues with it. So that's where you want to have this will only preserve the white clover. All right, so that's one thing that this product is good for, is it controls many of the broadleaf weeds. Unfortunately, it's going to be weak on things like horse nettle and milkweed and dogbane and Canada thistle and smooth bedstraw. So some of the big weeds that we're always dealing with, unfortunately this herbicide is not going to control those. But again, it has very good activity on things like buttercup and wild carrot and the biennial thistles, poison hemlock, dandelion, and mare's tail. So it has a pretty good spectrum of weeds, but unfortunately, some of the most problematic weeds that we deal with in a lot of our pastures and hay, is going to be are not going to be hit. So. And one thing nice about this, it has a very no or very minimal grazing restriction. Mainly for like lactating dairy, for example, it's just a 3-day wait. Other situations, it's a 0 day. Depending on other livestock, a 0 day. And then even like the haying, it's only 14 days to hay. So it's going to be a interesting product. I think we'll have quite a bit of utility in our region here, especially since it preserves the white clover. Now, keep in mind when I say preserves white clover, once you spray it on white clover, you will see some twisting and bending and crinkling of it. But then after 10 days or so, it regenerates, and definitely gets to be out of that injured state. But whereas if you use something like dicamba, you're gonna wipe the clover out pretty well. So just keep in mind that you will see a little bit of injury on white clover, even though it's labeled for utility in that setting.
So I think that's a good point to stop on herbicides. We've talked a lot about corn and beans and some of the new pasture stuff in what's coming out in this year and what's labeled and will be upcoming label. Next, Dwight, let's talk about Enlist and dicamba and the E3 beans and where we see acreages kind of being planted or not planted. So let's start there right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so yeah, there's as I go around the state and do meetings and get phone calls and things like that, a lot of folks are interested in exactly what kind of acreages and so forth we're going to see. And you think about it here, at least in Pennsylvania, we grow, we're kind of small potatoes, if you will. We only grow around 600,000 acres of soybeans in general. And similar to last season, as far as the breakdown, there's probably going to be at least 70 or 75% of those most of those will be E3 beans. All right. And then Extend Flex beans, they'll still be sold. But really we're probably going to talk maybe 25 or 30%. And then there's always just kind of a 1% or so of miscellaneous other types of platforms. But really what's interesting about that is, from some of the statistics from the NASA statistics, is that about 96% of all the soybean acres have used some kind of a herbicide resistant trait or variety. So it's you're seeing more and more of those coming onto the market. And just to kind of quickly cover the Extend, there's a lot of questions about what's going on with the Extend Flex system that as you recall, about a year ago, back in February 2024, we had the U.S. District Court in Arizona. They vacated the registrations of Ingenia, Extendamax, and Tavium. The three dicamba products that could be legally applied over the top of XtendFlex systems, and that process that is still in place. The current ruling is still in effect, and so those products will not be sold for the upcoming season, most likely. I mean, unless something miraculously gets through EPA and so forth. But it seems like there's so many other things going on that I can't imagine we'll see any of those dicamba products that will be allowed in the Extend Flex system this year. So really, you're kind of left, at least in the Extend Flex system, is the use of glyphosate, the Roundup and other types of glyphosate products for over the top. And then Liberty or glufosinate would be the other one that could be other type of herbicide that could be sprayed, as well as all the other conventional type products, that are across the board with soybeans in general. And then if we go to the Enlist system, Enlist E3, in that case, we have kind of the three big products, if you will, the three major ones, which would be Enlist 1, which is the 2,4-D choline. That would be one that could be used, post-emergence on that. And then there's a kind of a sister product to that called Enlist Duo, which also has the 2,4-D choline plus glyphosate. But most of the acreage I'm aware of is mostly going to be Enlist 1. And then, of course, Liberty, and then your glufosinate, and then also glyphosate products can be applied to that as well. As and also with the conventional products can be used in addition to those. So again, it's just trying to keep track of exactly what can be sprayed, and just keep in mind that with the Extend Flex system that 2,4-D cannot be used. The Enlist 1 or 2,4-D products cannot be used over the top. It will severely injure or kill the soybeans, and you can't use the dicamba products on E3 beans. So just understanding that those are the only ones that can be used. And also, we're hearing more and more reports of, because of the commodity prices and other input costs and increasing and so forth, that people are trying to cut corners. And again, I understandably so, but they're starting to use these 2,4-D products, for example, that aren't labeled that aren't labeled for use over the top in E3 beans. So whether you're just using like a LV4 or an LV6 type product, those technically are not allowed to be sprayed over the top in Enlist soybeans. All right. And even from a burn down standpoint, if you do by chance spray an LV4 product at say a pint, legally you have to wait 1 week in order to plant even the Enlist soybeans. So it kind of reverts back to those labels. So even though they would technically be tolerant, from a legal standpoint, you have to follow the regulations on that.
So, Dwight, I want to quick jump back to the Extendamax, Fexapan, and Genia, those type of labels. That is a federal law change, right? That is not specific to Pennsylvania that we can't use those over the top. That is the anyone listening in the United States. Is that right?
That's federal law, so
Okay.
nobody in that. Yeah, so as of last year, as of February 6th of 2024, the manufacturers, so BASF and Bayer and Syngenta, of those three products, they are not allowed to sell those, market those anymore. And then as of last year, if say a dealer had some of those products on stock, they were allowed to sell those until May 31st. And then the applicators were allowed to spray those until June 30th. But since then, all of that, those dates have come and gone, and we're still being held into effect of that. So yeah, even if you have these products on stock, legally you're not allowed to spray those in the Extend Flex system.
Now, Dwight, are there any signs that any of that legislation will change? I know last year there was some talk about trying to kind of turn the legislation back and whatnot, but it's been pretty quiet since. So I'm kind of curious if this is going to be something we are going to contend with moving forward, or if the companies will just kind of bring new traits into the market and forget about this all.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, so the companies, for example, the ones that we talked about there, they've already petitioned the EPA to allow the utility of those dicamba products in Extend Flex. So they've petitioned to allow it be able to use dicamba, or at least the Ingenia, Extendamax, and Tavium pre-emergence. And then also some of them, it's my understanding, they also were trying to get even applications up to the V2 stage, early post. or a June 12th cutoff. Now, that's what was proposed, and again, and it's my understanding that the majority of those they sent those to the EPA already last kind of middle of summer. I think it was like June or July of last year, and it's a slow process. It seems like it's going to be 28 months or more before any of this stuff would happen. So you can see it takes time for it to get through the system. Um, so yeah, I think there's still some hope that they may be able to get some of those back into into the utility of with the different platforms. Obviously, with the new administration in place, they may have a little more flexibility to allow some of these to happen, but as of right now, I don't foresee any of that happening, at least in at least the utility of those products here for this summer, for the spring and summer. But yeah, I mean, companies are always looking at other products to potentially use, or looking at the biotech in order to develop new crops and traits and so forth in order to be able to apply certain products over the top. I know, for example, one that's we're getting a lot more. There's a lot more research in is the PPOs, the Group 14s. So some of the products that are coming down the line are pretty broad spectrum, and instead of just using them, say, for burn down, the hope is that they could be used actually in crop, over the top, to control some of these species that some maybe we're getting resistance to other active ingredients and other modes of action.
So one of the things you mentioned there was that companies are petitioning to spray later, right? Pushing up to R2 and using some of these different utilities, right?
Well, this is V2, V2.
Excuse
Yeah,
me, V2.
V2.
Sorry.
Yeah, so that would have been early season. Yeah, so at least it's because before, yeah, we were allowed to use them into the R1, R2 phase. Well, now they were trying to petition, at least let us have an early
Okay,
season,
so
at
they're
least to
not
the
trying to make it
V2.
more. They're trying to say even if it's
Yeah.
more restrictive, at least let us use it.
Right. Yeah, because
Okay,
that's
all right.
that's the hope there. And then also that was the reason for the date. At least right now it was like the June 12th cutoff, and so then that way that would preclude, at least in our area, any type of double crop beans. So that the only you could use it in a full season bean, but you wouldn't be able to use that in a double crop bean.
Gotcha. That makes more sense.
So
Thank you for
yeah,
that
yeah,
clarification.
yeah. So it's V2, not R2. So again, that was what was some of the proposals I heard. I mean, that's some of those things that they who knows what's happening behind the scenes, whether they're trying to petition for other angles. But that was the last thing I heard, was that was what they were looking at, to try to get some utility out of that product.
So, can you maybe explain for some of our listeners that might not be as read up on some of these changes, maybe why the concern would be for later applications versus earlier applications, just from maybe an environmental standpoint or just a usage standpoint?
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things where we're more and more we need to be concerned about, the utility of these products and using them correctly. One thing that you think about with even the products that, just using as an example, the ones that can be sprayed on the E3 bean. So, for example, in list one and in list duo, they actually say that you can spray it from emergence through the R1 growth stage. All right. But then you go to Liberty, for example, and Liberty says emergence to bloom stage, or R1 stage. So right there, we already have, through R1, and then as it says, up to, and not including. And then you have glyphosate, for example, it says through the full flowering stage, which is R2. So so there you have three products right there that all could be sprayed in the E3 system post emergence, and there's problems, or there's no you can't just tank mix them all and spray them at R2 stage, because you have to take the most restrictive. So that's why you have to be aware of this, and a lot of this has to do with these what's called maximum residue limits, MRLs. And so what's happening is, as soon as you start to spray these late, the residue limits that can be found in the commodities at the end of the season could still be found there. All right. So, that's one aspect. Another aspect is just, the fact that, late applications in general can cause, crop injury or crop or yield loss. And you think about potentially there's things with some of these products that maybe we didn't discuss here yet, but other ones that are on the market that they could cause things like flower abortion or pollination interference, seed viability. For example, those who, save seed. So next year, like for example, if you have like a Roundup Ready 1 seed and you're spraying it at the say the R5 stage or R6 stage, well, there's research that's shown that actually that can actually cause issues with seed viability for next year. So up to 60% or so of the seed viability could cause problems. So therefore you're not going to get good germination of the seed next year. So those are just some examples that you need to be aware of. And then of course just things like sprayer tracks. As the sprayer is going down through the field, you can get once you get past the R1 stage, the plant is not as resilient, and you can have some issues, with yield loss. There's been some studies over the years. I know in the Midwest at Purdue and then Virginia Tech did some studies, and they found, upwards of maybe 4 to 5% yield loss. Again, that's all dependent on the size of your boom. So if you're using a 30-foot boom versus a 120-foot boom, of course you're going to get more potential yield loss because of more wheel tracks and with a 30-foot boom than 120 foot. So that's things like that need to be considered. And then just poor weed control. The later you go, the larger the weeds are going to get, and then also they're going to be hiding underneath the crop canopy and causing problems. So a lot of these labels say you need to be out there less than 6 inches, or some even say 3 inches tall. And a lot of the weeds by then are going to be too tall, or they're going to be hidden underneath the canopy, so you're not going to get effective control. And then as I mentioned, kind of this other thing that we need to be very concerned about is these maximum residue limits. And a lot of the assumption out there is thinking that just because we have a herbicide that can be sprayed on even like maybe an R4, R5, or R6 soybean, that just because it doesn't cause any injury, that means everything's okay. Well, you can't assume that, because what's happening is that herbicide is being taken it moved right into that seed. And then it stays there, either the herbicide residue or some of its breakdown metabolites, and those can be detected, and then therefore you can have load rejections because of that, or other penalties. But then on top of that, people say, well, I can spray some of these as a harvest aid. Well, but as a harvest aid, that's different than during when the plant is still actually growing. So as a harvest aid, you're spraying it after the plant is physiologically mature, and it's actually has no, it does not getting any of that movement of the sap and other issues related to movement of nutrients and so forth, and herbicides and whatnot into that seed. So the herbicide doesn't get into the seed at that point. It would stay on the outside of the seed pod or the husk of the corn or whatnot. So I think that's where the confusion comes, is that like we can spray it at maturity, but we can't spray it at R5 or R6. Well, they're two different. You need to think about the plant and the biology of the plant.
So I think that vegetative and reproductive stages is one of the things that we rattle off in an assumption that most people know
Yes,
what that means, right? And
that's right.
there's a really nice document out of Madison, Wisconsin, out of the University of Madison, Wisconsin extension called Cool Bean, and we'll put a link
Yeah,
to that document in our
yeah,
show notes that kind of steps you through what all this R1 versus R2 and the things that happen there. But the thing that I see the most importance to, at least where I sit and practical, is understanding it was really nice when it was a date, right? When it was June 30, because June 30 is the same day every year. Understanding that R1 is not the same time every year, and it's not the same place in every field based on your planting time or your variety or any of these things that you're doing, right? And so to kind of compound where you started with this of things being through R1 versus at R1 versus up to R2. Well, now that can change based on your property, right? And
that's
and
right.
where you
Yeah,
started and where you ended across one field, or if you're at 3 2s versus 2 8s. And so we say it all the time, scout, right?
yeah.
Get out there and look at these beans before you start doing something. One, to make sure it's the right herbicide, but two, make sure you're just doing label and you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. It is. it's obviously a higher management, situation to be out there scouting and knowing exactly where the crop is from a maturity standpoint. But I guess my concern is, I'm not trying to be provide negativity here, but I'm concerned that all of a sudden, if they start testing for more of these commodities at the mill or at the elevator or whatnot, and they start finding more residues in them, then, aside from just, being fined or the commodity being seized, all of a sudden we start losing herbicide registrations. And then we're starting to lose tools that we need in order to effectively control some of these problem weeds that we're dealing with. So really that's my concern right now, is that we have all the tools available to us, and that we use them correctly so that they aren't taken away from us. Because as an industry, that we already have a black eye here and there from other aspects, and it's just one more thing that we want to do the right thing, and use these things correctly.
So unfortunately, I think a lot of this job is being the negative person, right? And I often tell them when I do these PowerPoints, I apologize that agriculture ends up being the one that carries the brunt of this, or you're blamed for most of it, or you have the responsibility as the producer. But that's the way this is, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's best that you hear it here, or we start to think about this a year or 2 years before it gets worse. Because just like you're saying, if we don't know this and we don't understand R1 versus R2, we can't begin to start making management changes. And then that seizure of the commodity or that loss of utility and all of these things start to kind of pick up, and we start to lose things. And here we are, right? So that negativity is kind of just, we're not saying it's going to happen, but if we're not careful, it's always just 1 or 2 growing seasons away.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, again, that's why the labels are there, and so just it's to really really protect us in general as an industry. So, and then obviously, the consumers, and we're the consumers too. So we want to do the right thing, and use these correctly.
Yeah, so and I think as a footnote here, when we're talking about all these technologies and what pest herbicides they're compatible with and the timing of all of this, um, if you're a farmer, you're probably using one of these technologies. Really take the time to understand, and you can find this information not only on the label, you should be reading your labels. Talk to, if you're using one of these genetically modified crops, talk to your seed rep. They'll have advice on when you can use products, where, and always you have extension to reach out to, because I think we're moving into a period of time where this is just becoming more and more complex, and that's what folks around you are there to help you with. Now, kind of as we're talking about preservation here, I think another thing when we're talking about herbicides and preservation, we think about not just, preserving these products from potential legislative acts, but preserving their utility in general. I think one of the things we were talking about earlier is the use of glufosinate. Can you, Dwight, talk a little bit about what's going on in the world of glufosinate, and maybe kind of what we can learn about this, and what it looks like for other products?
Yeah, yeah, and just to highlight one thing that you mentioned there, always as far as resources, is that's why we have the things like the agronomy guide, resources like the agronomy guide, because we try to take that information that sometimes can be seen to be hidden within the labels. Sometimes it's not as evident as we'd like it to be, and we try to pull that information out the best we can, and put it into tables and other kind of user-friendly kind of bulleted text and so forth that's easy to find a little bit more so. But again, the label is still the final say, but we try to do that with something like the agronomy guide. But anyway, yeah, as you're mentioning, just the utility of certain herbicides. One in particular that I know that there's concern amongst the us, or the weed scientists, myself included, is the use of glufosinate, or products like Liberty and Interline and Cheetah, and there's several other types of generic glufosinate on the market, is because it's a good herbicide to help control things like mare's tail and Palmer amaranth and water hemp, and ragweed and so forth. We want to make sure we're using it correctly. and it's one of those things where it is a broad spectrum herbicide in general. So a lot of people assume they can just be a replacement, a direct replacement for glyphosate or Roundup, and that's really not the case. It's about and it's kind of the joke is about the only thing that's the same about these two products is the letter G at the beginning of the name, and after that you need there's some specifics that you need to be aware of. Yes, they do have broad spectrum control in general, but one thing about glufosinate is it's a contact herbicide. So you need to have good coverage, spray coverage and so forth. It does a pretty good job on many annual broadleaves. But it tends to be a little bit weaker on grasses in general because it doesn't have the effectiveness of glyphosate. I mean, glyphosate is a great grass herbicide, but glufosinate it's adequate, but it needs help in a lot of cases. And the same thing with perennials. Glyphosate in general, because it's systemic, has pretty good perennial activity. But glufosinate, since it's a contact herbicide, it tends to be not as effective. You'll get some top growth burning, but you're probably going to need to go back and control it with something else. And then just just understanding that you have to have good amount of spray volume as we talked about. So at least 15 if not 20 gallons per acre needs to be used in terms of a spray volume. Make sure that the nozzles that you're using produce medium to coarse droplet sizes, and a lot of that is defined in the label, but it's also, if you're looking at your nozzle selection catalogs and so forth, that needs to be thought about as well. And then just the types of adjuvants that need to be included. I mean, really ammonium sulfate is one of the best adjuvants to include with Liberty or glufosinate products. And it really improves the activity of the herbicide on the different weeds. And then also anti-foaming agents. One thing about these glufosinate products, they tend to foam up really profusely, and it's best to include some kind of an anti-foaming agent with it. And in most cases, it's not necessary to add some kind of a surfactant or a crop oil, crop methylated seed oil, things like that. And I mean, especially now, if you're tank mixing with something else that requires it, then yes, they can be in there. But you really need to be aware of what you're including in there, because you can get some crop injury associated with the different types of adjuvants you're putting in there. So again, that's a whole nother area that can spend a lot of time talking about that. And then just think about application timing. As far as the time of day, it's kind of referred to as Liberty or glufosinate is referred to as like a 9 to 5 herbicide. Meaning that you need to have bright sunlight, and real bright, moist, high humidity, high no dew or mist on the leaves. So things like that need to be adhered to as well. And that's one of the reasons why it doesn't make that good of a burn down herbicide in the spring, because a lot of times you have poor conditions in terms of real cool and cloudy, and weeds are kind of under stress and so forth. So anyway, those are some things to be thinking about, just the utility of it. And then always, in order to save the utility, is to make sure there's residuals in the mix. So whether you're using residuals as a pre, or sometimes you can add residuals post-emergence with Liberty in order to get that effective weed control extended throughout a little bit later into the growing season. So again, those are just some kind of general overview things that need to be thought about. That it has good activity and we don't want to lose it, but you have to use it right when it's being applied.
Sure. I think that for all of those reasons you said, I think it's important for folks to keep in mind that it is not a direct replacement for glyphosate. I think you're right. A lot of times you see folks recommending use glyphosate or glufosinate. So a lot of times folks tend to kind of conflate the two and think of them very similarly, but they are different. And do you think it would be fair to say that glufosinate, it's not necessarily a replacement for glyphosate. It's basically something that you can add to your rotation to knock out some of those harder to control weeds. And is this something you do want to make sure you're rotating with glyphosate? Or what would be a good kind of thing to rotate it with, right, to further preserve its utility, especially, if it's controlling things like your Palmer amaranth and water hemp that we know can adapt so quickly, right? How do we use this properly?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we use that. In addition to glyphosate. I mean, I know there's a lot of farmers out there and applicators that will use kind of the typical a quart and a quart. A quart of Liberty 280 or generics equivalent, and then a quart of glyphosate. Because the glyphosate picks up a certain spectrum of weeds. And, obviously, it's going to pick up the grasses that the Liberty may be a little bit weaker on. Um, so yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the reasons why, in addition to those, we always say include the residual herbicides because the residual herbicides are going to add, that extra spectrum of control of some of these species, so they don't get to be too big. Because if you look at the Liberty label, you're really supposed to be out there when they're less than 3 inches tall, and with the weeds that are on the label. So it doesn't take long to get a weed to get 3 inches tall, especially in the nice warm spring, or even after a herbicide's been applied, and then the residual starts to run out. So that's why you really want to make sure you're using these effective modes of action, with in tank mixtures, but also in a program situation as well.
I think a valuable part of the agronomy guide is you do have tables for these weed heights, right? And different things. And specifically in this conversation, we are talking about Liberty and glufosinate and maybe comparing that to Roundup and glyphosate. But a lot of those others are now listed in there, right? And you can kind of make that comparison of if you're tank mixing or when that time is most suited and most applicable for some of these different types of herbicides.
Yeah, I mean, and so yeah, looking at tables like that can really help determine the timing of application, but then also you can use other subset of tables that we have in the guide that just look at efficacy ratings. So you can see if you've gotten kind of 5 or 6 major weeds, and then you kind of look at those major weeds in this table, and you see which herbicide is going to give you the best control of those species. So you're probably going to have to include, a combination of different products. And then also, as I mentioned, some of the additional residuals. I mean, the idea is you want to have more than one effective mode of action. Just because you have, say, 4 different products in the tank doesn't mean they're going to be, effective and different modes of action. So you not only you're looking at the effectiveness of them, and generally, what we mean by effectiveness is they really should be at least 85% control or higher, and a completely different mode of action. And you really want to have at least two effective and unique modes of action when you're putting these programs together. So it can be challenging. I know there are certain apps that are being developed to help with this. Right now, I don't have one in particular that's I can recommend, but I know some of my colleagues at other universities are actually working on these apps where you can input the different programs, and you put the herbicides that you want to use, and then kind of the subset of weeds that you have, and then from there, then you'd hit button, and it would spit out and say, well, you have a good enough complement of herbicides to kill these 3 weeds, but this other weed or two, you really need to embellish the program to get a much better an effective control with the additional modes of action or effectiveness. So again, those things are being developed, but I'm not aware of any that are immediately ready right now.
Well, that's a pretty exciting idea. I could see, with all of this advancement in, AI and just the technology of algorithms, that could really be a potent tool to help folks navigate this and reduce some of the resistance issues we're having. So I'm kind of excited by that little tidbit you left for us. Now, I think that kind of covers a lot of what we came here to learn from you today, Dwight. Are there any other things that we missed that you want to talk about, or is that kind of a good update for herbicides in 2025?
Yeah, I think that we covered a lot of ground here, over the last couple of sessions we've had here, and Yeah, I mean there's always something to talk about when it comes to weed science and weed management and so forth. But yeah, I think those are kind of the highlights for this year. And then yeah, if there's additional questions, you can definitely reach out to me or to some of my colleagues around the state in their various extension educator roles and so forth. And we'll definitely be glad to get you an answer.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dwight. It's always a pleasure to have your expertise on the show. So we will definitely be loitering to have you back here. We really appreciate it. And for our audience, thank you for sticking with us on all these 2025 updates. I think this is a great way to kick off the year and move out of the winter and into the spring sooner than we might think. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you on another episode of the Agronomy Highlights podcast.